You earn a mature salary, yet you are one emergency away from financial panic. You are trapped in an invisible system that programs you to exchange your life energy for objects that depreciate the second you buy them. You have been trained to be an elite consumer. To find real freedom, you must ruthlessly rewire your brain to become a producer. There is a specific kind of anxiety that doesn't make sense on paper. You earn well. On the surface, your life looks stable, maybe even successful. Your income is higher than it has ever been. You can afford things you once considered luxuries. And yet there is a quiet tension underneath everything. You check your bank account, and instead of feeling secure, you feel uncertain. Not because you're irresponsible, but because you know if something unexpected happens, you're not as protected as you should be. One emergency. That's all it takes to disrupt everything. And that realization sits in the background of your life like low-grade static. Let me ask you something. If your income stopped today, how long would your current lifestyle survive? Not your basic survival. Your lifestyle. Because those are not the same thing. This is where the discomfort begins. Most people at this stage are not struggling to earn. They are struggling to keep up. You get a raise and your life expands to match it. A better apartment. A nicer car. More dining out. More subscriptions. More small upgrades that feel justified. And none of them feel excessive on their own. But together they form a system. A system that quietly absorbs every increase in your income. This is what people call lifestyle creep. But that phrase is too soft for what it actually does. It locks you in. Because once your lifestyle expands, it becomes your new baseline. You don't experience it as luxury anymore. You experience it as normal. And anything below it feels like loss. So now, your higher income is no longer freedom. It is maintenance. You are no longer building. You are sustaining. And sustaining requires constant input, which means you cannot slow down. You cannot step back. You cannot take risks. Because the cost of your life is now fixed at a high level. This is what creates the golden handcuffs. From the outside, everything looks elevated. But internally, your flexibility is gone. You are earning more, but you feel more trapped. Think about a simple example. You receive a significant raise. At first, you feel relief. Finally, more space. But within months, that space disappears. You upgrade your living situation. You justify it because you've earned it. You upgrade your daily habits. Better food, better experiences, better everything. And slowly, without noticing, your monthly expenses rise to meet your new income. 6 months later, your financial stress returns. Nothing catastrophic happened, but nothing improved either. That's the cycle. More income, more spending, same pressure. Let me ask you something honestly. How much of what you spend each month is actually necessary, and how much is maintaining a version of your life you become attached to? Because attachment is the key word here. You are not just paying for things. You are paying to sustain an identity, a certain image, a certain standard. And once that identity is established, it becomes difficult to challenge. Because reducing your lifestyle doesn't feel like optimization. It feels like regression. Even if it's the smarter move. This is where the quiet desperation begins. You don't talk about it. You don't post about it. But you feel it. The pressure to maintain. To keep earning. To avoid disruption. Because the system you've built around your income does not allow for instability. And life is inherently unstable. Unexpected expenses, health issues, economic shifts, they are not rare events. They are inevitable. But your financial structure is not built to absorb them. It is built to perform under ideal conditions, which means when reality intervenes, stress follows. And here is the uncomfortable truth. You are not poor, but you are not free either. You are operating at a high level with a fragile foundation, and that fragility creates a constant, underlying tension, not loud enough to force change, but strong enough to prevent peace. Think about that. You've done what you were told. Worked hard, increased your income, improved your life, and yet the feeling you expected, security, control, freedom, is still out of reach. So the question becomes unavoidable. If earning more isn't solving the problem, what actually is? Because until you answer that, you will continue running the same pattern. At a higher level, with higher stakes, but the same underlying pressure. The real problem is not your income, and it's not your expenses in isolation. The real problem is the psychological system driving your decisions. Because if you look closely, most of your financial behavior is not logical. It is emotional. And more importantly, it is conditioned. You've been told a simple rule for years. Spend less. Save more. It sounds responsible. It sounds rational. But for most people, it doesn't work long term. Not because they don't understand it, but because it doesn't address the real driver of their behavior. Saving money is not difficult mathematically. It is difficult psychologically, because every spending decision is not just about utility. It is about identity. Let's go deeper. When you buy something, especially something visible, you are not just purchasing an object. You are purchasing a signal to others and to yourself. This is who I am. This is where I belong. This is my level. And your brain is highly sensitive to that signal. Because humans are social. Status matters. Belonging matters. Perception matters. So when you upgrade your car, your home, your clothes, your brain registers more than ownership. It registers elevation. And in that moment, something happens neurologically. A spike. Dopamine. Serotonin. A short burst of satisfaction. Relief. Not just because you acquired something, but because you temporarily resolve an internal tension. You feel aligned. You feel validated. You feel like you've caught up. But here's the problem. That feeling is temporary. Always. Let me give you a simple, familiar pattern. You buy something you've been wanting. At first, it feels significant. You notice it. You enjoy it. You even justify it. This was worth it. But within days, maybe weeks, something changes. The excitement fades. The object becomes part of your environment. Normal. And once it becomes normal, It stops producing the same emotional effect. So what happens next? The brain looks for the next upgrade. Not because you need it, but because you want to recreate the feeling. This is a loop. Insecurity purchased temporary relief, adaptation, new desire. And it runs quietly, repeatedly, without being questioned. Let me ask you something honestly. How many things have you bought in the last year that once felt important and now feel completely ordinary? That answer matters, because it reveals something uncomfortable. You are not just spending money. You are chasing a feeling that cannot last. And the system around you is designed to keep that loop active. Modern marketing is not about features. It is about emotion. It identifies your insecurities, status, belonging, success, and offers a product as a solution. Subtly, you will feel better if you have this. You will be seen differently. You will be closer to the version of yourself you want to be. And for a moment it works. But only for a moment. Because the underlying insecurity was never resolved. It was just masked. This is why traditional advice like just budget better often fails. Because it treats spending as a math problem, when in reality, it is a psychological one. You are not overspending because you lack discipline. You are overspending because your brain has been trained to associate consumption with relief. Relief from pressure. Relief from comparison. Relief from feeling behind. And as long as that association exists, you will continue to spend, regardless of how much you earn. Let me ask you a harder question. When you make a purchase, are you solving a real problem, or are you regulating a feeling? Because those are not the same. One builds your life. The other maintains an illusion. And most people never separate the two. They simply continue earning more and spending more in an attempt to stabilize a feeling that keeps resetting. This is why income alone does not create wealth. Because if your internal system remains unchanged, your external results will always follow the same pattern. More money, more consumption, same level of security, or lack of it. So the issue is not that you need to try harder to save. It's that you need to understand why you spend. Because until you break the psychological loop, every increase in income will simply feed the system that keeps you stuck. Not visibly, but structurally. And that is why so many people look successful, but feel financially fragile. They have optimized for appearance, not for stability. And those are two very different outcomes. Warren Buffett is often used as an example of wealth, but most people focus on the wrong part of the story. They look at the billions. They look at the net worth. They look at the outcome. And they miss the behavior that made it possible. Because Buffett's real advantage was not intelligence alone. It was psychological resistance. Resistance to noise. Resistance to status. Resistance to the pressure to appear successful. While the world around him was accelerating, spending more, signaling more, upgrading constantly, he did something very different. He stayed still. He lived in the same house for decades. A house he bought in 1958. Not because he couldn't afford more, but because he didn't need to prove anything. Think about that for a moment. A man with the financial ability to own anything chose not to. That is not a financial decision. That is a psychological one. Because most people, as their income increases, feel an internal pressure to upgrade, to match their environment, to align with their peers, to signal that they've made it. Buffett ignored that completely. Not once. Consistently. And that consistency is where the real power lies. Let me ask you something. If your income doubled tomorrow, what would change in your life within 6 months? Be honest. Because for most people, the answer is immediate. Better home. Better car. Better lifestyle. Not because it's necessary, but because it feels appropriate. Buffett rejected that logic entirely. He understood something most people don't. Every dollar you spend on signaling is a dollar that stops working for you. And money that stops working loses its power. Because wealth is not built through income. It is built through compounding. And compounding requires time, patience, and most importantly, capital that is left untouched. This is where his discipline becomes visible. Buffett didn't just invest. He protected his ability to invest. He kept his cost of living low relative to his income. He avoided unnecessary upgrades. He ignored trends. He stayed focused on one thing, letting his capital grow. Quietly, without interruption. And this is where the contrast becomes uncomfortable. Most people increase their income and immediately reduce their future wealth. By increasing their expenses. By locking themselves into higher obligations. By converting potential assets into depreciating liabilities. Buffett did the opposite. He preserved his optionality. He kept his system flexible. He allowed his money to compound over decades. Not months. Not years. Decades. Let me ask you something. Are your current financial decisions aligned with long-term compounding or short-term validation? Because those two paths rarely overlap. One requires patience. The other rewards immediacy. One builds silently. The other performs publicly. Buffett chose silence. And that silence is often misunderstood as simplicity. But it is not simple. It is disciplined. Because ignoring status in a status-driven world requires constant internal control. Every time you choose not to upgrade, not to spend, not to signal, you are going against a powerful current. Social pressure, cultural expectations, internal comparison. Buffett removed himself from that current. He did not optimize for how he appeared. He optimized for how his capital behaved over time. And that is the shift from appearance to function, from consumption to production, from short-term satisfaction to long-term control. There is another layer to this that most people overlook. Buffett did not just delay gratification. He redefined it. His reward was not in spending. It was in growth. Watching his investments compound. Watching his capital expand. Watching time do the work. That becomes a different kind of satisfaction. Quieter, but far more powerful. Because it is not dependent on constant input. It builds on itself. And once that mindset is established, everything changes. You stop asking, what can I buy? And you start asking, what can this become if I don't touch it? That question alone separates consumers from wealth builders. Let me ask you one final question. Do you want to look wealthy? Or do you want to become someone whose wealth grows whether you are paying attention or not? Because Buffett made that decision early, and then he protected it, relentlessly, not through complexity, but through restraint. And that restraint, repeated over decades, is what created the outcome people admire. Not the income, not the opportunities, but the ability to say no when the world says spend. There's a system quietly running in the background of your life that makes wealth almost impossible to build, no matter how much you earn. And the most dangerous part is this. It feels normal. It feels like progress. It even feels like success. This system is called the hedonic treadmill. And once you see it clearly, you will understand why so many people run faster financially, but never actually move forward. The mechanism is simple. You acquire something new, a better apartment, a nicer car, a premium experience. At first, it feels significant. There's excitement, pride, a sense of elevation. Your brain responds with a spike in dopamine. This is better. This is progress. This is what I've been working for. But that state does not last, because your brain is designed to adapt. Very quickly, what once felt like a luxury becomes normal. What once excited you becomes expected. And once something becomes expected, it stops producing the same emotional reward. So the baseline shifts upward. And now, what used to feel like more than enough starts to feel average. This is a treadmill. You move forward in effort, but your sense of satisfaction resets to zero. Let me give you a clear example. You move into a better home. At first, everything feels elevated. The space, the environment, the identity attached to it. You notice it daily. You appreciate it. But within a few months, it fades into the background. It becomes your new normal. And now, instead of feeling grateful for it, you start comparing it to something bigger, to something newer, to something next level. And the cycle begins again. Let me ask you something. How many things in your life right now were once goals you thought would make you feel successful, and now they just feel standard? That answer is the treadmill in action. Now here is where it becomes dangerous, because your income often rises alongside this adaptation. You earn more, so you upgrade again, and again, and again. But your satisfaction does not scale with your income. It resets with your baseline. So no matter how much you increase your lifestyle, you feel the same. Or worse, slightly behind. Because now your standard is higher and harder to maintain. This is how people end up earning more than ever, but feeling no more secure than before. Because psychologically, they are still chasing the same feeling, just at a higher cost. Now let's connect this to your brain. Dopamine does not reward possession. It rewards change, novelty, improvement. The moment something stops being new, the dopamine response drops. So your brain is constantly pushing you toward the next upgrade. Not because you need it, but because it wants to recreate that initial spike. And this creates a subtle but powerful illusion. You begin to believe that the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next level will finally create lasting satisfaction. But it never does, because the system is designed to reset. Let me ask you something honestly. Are you building a life, or are you upgrading a baseline that keeps moving? Because those are not the same. One creates stability. The other creates dependency. Dependency on growth. Dependency on income. Dependency on maintaining a lifestyle that no longer feels special, but still costs you. And this is where financial pressure quietly increases. Not because you are irresponsible, but because your expectations have expanded faster than your satisfaction. Now you need more just to feel the same. And that is the trap. The treadmill does not just affect your happiness. It affects your decisions. It pushes you to spend sooner, upgrade faster, commit to higher fixed costs, because your current level no longer feels enough. And once those costs are locked in, your flexibility disappears. You must keep earning. You must keep performing. You must keep running. Even if you don't want to. Even if you're tired. Even if you would rather slow down. Because the system you built requires constant input. This is how high earners become financially fragile. Not through lack of income, but through adaptation. Through silent, gradual increases in what they consider normal. Let me ask you a harder question. If your lifestyle stayed exactly the same for the next 5 years, would that feel like failure to you? Or would it feel like control? Because your answer reveals whether you are on the treadmill or stepping off it. Now here's a critical insight. You do not escape the treadmill by earning more. You escape it by stabilizing your baseline, by consciously deciding, this is enough, not temporarily, structurally. Because the moment your baseline stabilizes, something powerful happens. Every increase in income stops being absorbed by lifestyle and starts becoming available for growth, for investment, for ownership, for freedom. That is the shift. From endless upgrading to controlled expansion. From chasing feelings to building assets. But that shift requires something most people avoid. Restraint. The willingness to stop escalating your life every time your income increases. The willingness to tolerate enough in a world that constantly pushes for more. And that is not easy. Because the treadmill is not just internal. It is social. Everyone around you is running, upgrading, signaling, comparing. So stepping off feels unnatural, even uncomfortable. But it is the only way forward. Because if you don't step off, you'll continue running. Faster, harder, at a higher level, but in the same place. Understanding the problem changes nothing unless your behavior changes at the point of decision. And financial decisions are rarely made in calm, rational states. They are made in moments of impulse, moments of comparison, moments of subtle insecurity. So if you don't have a system, you default to the same patterns. Spending for relief. Spending for identity. Spending to maintain a standard that keeps moving. What you need is not better intentions. You need structure. Something that removes emotion from financial behavior and replaces it with clarity. This is where the value creation matrix comes in. Not as a theory, as a filter, a way to evaluate every dollar that leaves your account. The first step is awareness, not general awareness, precise awareness. You need to track every dollar you spend for 30 days. Everything, not estimates, not categories you assume, actual data. Because most people think they know where their money goes. They don't. They underestimate small expenses. They justify medium ones, and they ignore the emotional ones entirely. So for 30 days, you remove assumption. You document. At the end of that period, you don't just have numbers. You have a map of your behavior. And that map will reveal something uncomfortable. Not how much you spend, but why you spend. The second step is categorization. Every expense must fall into one of three categories. Need. Ego. Investment. Need is simple. Housing. Food. Transportation. Essentials that support your basic function. Investment is also clear. Anything that builds future value. Assets. Skills. Education. Business. But ego is where most of your leakage exists. Ego spending is not about necessity. It is about perception. Clothing you don't need, but feel compelled to wear. Upgrades that don't improve function, but improve image. Experiences chosen not for meaning, but for how they look. And here's the critical part. Ego spending rarely feels like ego spending in the moment. It feels justified. I work hard. I deserve this. This is my level now. But when you see it clearly, on paper, it becomes obvious. A significant portion of your income is not building your future. It is maintaining your image. Let me ask you something. If no one could see what you own, how much of your current spending would remain? That answer is your ego cost. The third step is elimination. Not reduction. Elimination. You remove 20% to 40% of ego-driven expenses. Without negotiation. Without emotional justification. This is where most people hesitate. Because cutting ego spending feels like losing status. It feels like stepping backward. But in reality, it is the first step forward. Because every dollar you remove from ego becomes a dollar you can redirect toward power. And make no mistake, capital is power, optionality, freedom, time. So the question becomes, do you want to look elevated or become independent? Because you cannot maximize both at the same time. The fourth step is redirection. You take a minimum of 20% of your income and you assign it a new role. Not consumption. Creation. This money must go into one of two places: compounding assets or skill acquisition. Assets generate future income. Skills increase your ability to generate income. Both move you away from dependency. Both shift you from consumer to producer. And this shift is critical. Because as long as you rely solely on your salary, you are trading time for money. Directly. And time is your most limited resource. So the goal is not just to earn. It is to build systems that earn for you. Even when you are not working. That is how freedom is created. Not through income alone, but through leverage. The fifth step is expansion of income streams. Most people stop at one. Their job, and they optimize within it. They ask for raises. They negotiate salaries. But they remain dependent. One source. One system. One point of failure. So you begin to build additional streams. Not immediately large, but intentional. Skills that can be monetized. Opportunities that can scale. This is not about working more hours. It is about increasing optionality. Because multiple income streams do something powerful psychologically. They reduce fear. You're no longer tied to a single outcome, and that alone changes how you operate. More confident, more strategic, less reactive. Now we introduce a critical control mechanism, the delay rule. For any non-essential purchase above a certain threshold, you wait. Minimum 30 days. No exceptions. Because most spending decisions are emotional spikes. Impulse disguises logic, and time removes emotion. What feels urgent today often feels irrelevant in a week, or unnecessary in a month. This single rule alone can eliminate a massive percentage of waste, because it interrupts the loop. Trigger desire purchase. You insert space, and in that space, clarity returns. The final step is identity, because without identity, none of this sustains. You must shift how you see yourself, not as someone who tries to save, but as someone who builds, who produces, who allocates capital with intention. You move from, what I want to buy, to, what does this money become if I don't spend it? That question changes behavior. And behavior, repeated, changes identity. Let me ask you something. Right now, are your financial decisions driven by impulse or by design? Because design requires friction. It requires saying no. It requires stepping outside of what feels normal. But it also creates something most people never experience. Control. Real control. Over your time. Your options. Your future. And once you feel that even slightly, the appeal of consumption begins to fade. Because you're no longer chasing temporary relief. You are building something that compounds. Quietly. Relentlessly. And most importantly, independently of how you feel. Now pause. Because this is where the conversation shifts from strategy to truth. Everything up to this point has been about systems, psychology, behavior. But none of that matters if you are not willing to confront a simple question. What are you actually working for? Not what you say, not what you post, what your actions reveal. Let me ask you something directly. Are you working 60 hours a week to buy your family's freedom, or to prove to strangers that you are successful? Think about that carefully. Because the difference is not in your income. It is in your intention. And intention shapes behavior. Look at your spending. Not the numbers. The pattern. The choices. The upgrades. The things you felt compelled to have. How many of those decisions were truly about improving your life, and how many were about being seen differently? Because most people don't chase wealth. They chase the appearance of wealth. And the cost of that pursuit is invisible. You trade flexibility for image. You trade long-term security for short-term validation. You trade ownership for consumption. Let me ask you something harder. If no one could see your house, your car, your clothes, your lifestyle, would you still choose them? Or would your decisions look completely different? Because that question exposes everything. It separates utility from ego, reality from performance. Now consider this. Every dollar you spend is a vote, not just for what you own, but for the life you are building. When you spend on consumption, you are reinforcing dependency. When you invest, You are building autonomy. And over time, those votes compound, just like money does. Quietly, relentlessly. So the question is not, can you afford this? The real question is, what is this costing your future? Because cost is not just financial. It is temporal. Every unnecessary expense extends the amount of time you must keep working. Every dollar not invested delays your freedom. Every upgrade that locks in higher expenses reduces your options. Let me ask you something honestly. Right now, are you building a life that gives you more control, or one that requires you to keep performing at a high level just to sustain it? Because those are very different trajectories. One leads to freedom. The other leads to pressure. And pressure, sustained over years, becomes your baseline. You normalize it. You accept it. You stop questioning it. And that is how people wake up a decade later earning more than they ever imagined, but still unable to step away. Still dependent. Still tied to the system they built. Not because they had to, but because they never stopped to ask why. So here's a question you need to sit with. Not answer quickly. Not intellectually. Honestly, are your current financial decisions aligned with the life you claim to want, or are they aligned with the image you feel pressure to maintain? Because those two paths may look similar in the short term, but over time they lead to completely different outcomes. At this point, there is no confusion left. You understand the system. You see the pattern. You know exactly where your money is going and why. So now, this is no longer about knowledge. It is about a decision. A clean break between two identities, the consumer and the architect. Because you cannot be both at a high level. A consumer reacts, sees something, wants something, buys something. An architect designs, allocates, builds, compounds. And the difference between those two lives is not income. It is discipline. Let's be precise. Discipline in this context is not restriction. It is control. Control over where your time goes. Control over where your money flows. Control over what kind of future you are building. Intentionally, not accidentally. Right now, whether you realize it or not, your financial life is already structured. Every dollar has a direction. The question is, did you choose that direction or did it default? Because default leads to consumption. Always. The environment is designed that way. So if you do nothing, if you simply continue as you are, you'll keep earning, keep spending, and keep feeling the same quiet pressure you feel now. Not because you're failing, but because you're following a system that was never designed to make you free. Let me ask you something directly. If your current habits continue for the next 5 years, what do you actually own? Not what you've experienced. Not what you consumed. What do you control? Assets, equity, time, or just a higher version of the same lifestyle with higher costs. Because that is where most people end up. More income, more complexity, same dependence, and eventually less flexibility. So the shift has to be deliberate. You stop seeing money as something to spend and start seeing it as something to deploy. Every dollar becomes a decision point. Consume or compound. And that decision, repeated consistently, defines your trajectory. This is where discipline becomes visible. not in extreme sacrifices, but in quiet choices. The upgrade you don't make, the purchase you delay, the percentage you invest before you touch anything else. These are not dramatic actions, but they are decisive because they move you out of a reactive system and into a designed one. Let me be clear about something. This will feel uncomfortable at first because you are going against years of conditioning. You will feel like you are missing out, like you are holding back, like you are not keeping up. That is the psychological cost of stepping out of the system. But on the other side of that discomfort, there is something most people never experience. Clarity. You begin to see your finances not as a source of stress, but as a structure you control. Your expenses stabilize. Your investments grow. Your dependence decreases. And slowly, something shifts internally. You stop chasing the appearance of wealth and start building the mechanics of it. And the mechanics are quiet. They do not show up on social media. They do not get external validation. But they create something far more valuable. Freedom. Not theoretical. Functional. The ability to make decisions without fear. The ability to step back without collapse. The ability to choose your direction instead of being forced into one. So here's the decision. Not emotional. Structural. Will you continue operating as a consumer optimizing for comfort, validation, and short-term relief? Or will you become an architect, building systems, assets, and long-term control? Because there is no middle ground. Every financial decision you make pushes you in one direction or the other, and that direction compounds. Quietly, relentlessly, until one day, you don't just see the difference. You live it. Look carefully at the system you are operating inside. It does not reward ownership. It rewards consumption. Every platform, every advertisement, every signal around you is designed to push one behavior. Spend. Upgrade. Keep moving the baseline. Because a person who constantly consumes never accumulates. And a person who never accumulates must keep working. This is not accidental. It is structural. So if you do nothing, if you simply continue earning and spending the way you always have, you are not maintaining your position. You are falling behind. Slowly. Quietly. But predictably. Because inflation rises. Expectations rise. And your need to sustain your lifestyle increases with both. Let me ask you something. 5 years from now, if your income increases but your habits stay the same, will your freedom increase? Or just your expenses? Because that is the trap. More money with the same mindset leads to the same outcome, just at a higher level. So this is not about money. It is about direction. And whether you are finally willing to step out of a system that keeps you earning but never lets you escape. Everything now comes down to one thing. Not your income, not your knowledge, not your intentions, your pattern, because patterns, repeated over time, become outcomes. And right now, whether you admit it or not, you already have a financial system. It is just not designed consciously. It is reactive. It responds to impulse, environment, and emotion. and that is why it feels unstable. So here is the final question. Not what you want to change, what you are willing to stop. Because building wealth is not just about adding investments. It is about removing behaviors, the unnecessary upgrade, the impulse purchase, the silent need to prove something. Those are the leaks. And unless they are closed, nothing compounds. Let me ask you something clearly. From this point forward, will your money reflect your priorities or your impulses? Because that answer will not show up in a week or a month. It will show up in 5 years. In what you own, in what you control, in how much of your time is truly yours. And the decision that determines all of that is not made in a big moment. It is made in the next small one, when you choose, consume or build. If you are ready to stop performing wealth and start building it, then don't treat this as information. Treat it as a line you do not cross again. Subscribe only if you are willing to think, spend, and act differently from this point forward. Because real wealth is not something you show. It is something you construct quietly and without compromise.